Well, the first thing I'd like to do is to say hello from New Orleans and come and visit us sometime in Louisiana and enjoy the wonderful atmosphere in New Orleans. We are recovering nicely from the hurricane and we can take lots of visitors. What I would like to talk about tonight, I'm going to give you some information about what the intelligent design movement is in the United States, who the most important people are, and explain what intelligent design is very briefly, as well as how it has been debunked or criticized, and some of the activities in which they have engaged, including in my own state of Louisiana. So it's really kind of a general introduction to the intelligent design creationist movement. You know that we have had our problems for the last 8 years in the United States, and George Bush in August of 2005 supported teaching intelligent design. Fortunately, that problem is no more, and I offer you my most sincere apology for the last 8 years. We have taken steps to correct that mistake. This is a statement made by our new president, Barack Obama, during his inaugural address. A president's inaugural address is probably one of the most important speeches that Americans ever hear from their president. And he very prominently made this statement, that we'll restore science to its rightful place. Well, the question is, why did a president have to say that to the American people? That's because in the United States, science is a political issue. This slide is from the website of a group called Science Debate 2008. This is a group of people, a couple of scientists, but actually one of them, Chris Mooney, is a young man who writes books about science. He's a science journalist. They were very concerned about the way the Bush administration literally attacked science in the United States. And so they worked very hard, and they had hundreds of supporters, very prominent scientists, who signed a statement urging all of the presidential candidates to address the question of science and to say something about it. And really, they wanted a debate. They wanted a televised debate. The candidates did not do that, but they did pay attention. And I think that when Obama made the statement about restoring science to its rightful place, he was largely addressing these people's concerns. So they deserve a lot of the credit for his making that statement to the American people. That's the group. And they do have a website if you're interested. So why is science a political issue in the United States? Oh, it's because of this guy, the work of Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin's work is so controversial in the United States because for the first time he came up with a natural explanation for how life on Earth was shaped. It was shaped by natural processes, as you can see here from his quote from his autobiography. And that's very, very controversial in the United States because in some people's minds, if you explain the origin of the human species without appealing to God, you are essentially taking an atheistic position, and if you teach this to children, you are teaching them the equivalent of atheism, and so they find this highly objectionable. So even though Darwin revolutionized biology, his work is still, in a cultural sense, controversial in the United States. This is the cover of Time magazine from 4 years ago. Time is a very popular news magazine, and the diagram is a bit old, but it's still largely correct. It's from 2001, but this figure here, almost half the American people believe that the Earth was created in 6 days, 6 24-hour days, and that the Earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. Almost half the American people, and that is consistent over a period of decades. So this is a real controversy, not a scientific controversy, but a cultural controversy in the United States. This is an article that was written in Science, the journal Science, in 2006. The authors are two scientists and also Eugenie Scott, who is the executive director of the National Center for Science Education, which is an organization that gives assistance to people in the United States when they are trying to counteract creationism. They did a survey of public opinion among adults in 34 countries to find out exactly what the level of acceptance of evolution is. And so you might be wondering how the United States compares with the rest of these countries, 34 countries. Well, we're number 2, just above Turkey, right? Which means that we have among the lowest levels of acceptance among adults in the world, the acceptance of evolution. We're above only Turkey, where there is a very active creationist movement. This is a little map that the National Center for Science Education made. We have a map on the wall. Our headquarters is in Oakland, California. We have a map on the wall, and we stick little pins in it every time we get a phone call from a parent or a teacher or someone who's concerned about creationism and they're having a problem. And so we have a little electronic file, a map, in which we keep track of these calls. These were reports of problems with state legislatures. You know, each state has a legislature which passes laws, and we got calls from 2005, 2006, and 2007 from all of these states in red. The state boards of education, every state has a board which governs its educational policy. We got calls from these states. There were local problems with creationism in these states. When you put all of those problems together, this is what the map of the United States looks like. So only, about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, only 8 states we've had no reports in those 3 years of problems with creationism at some level. Only 8 states. I'm sorry, 9. I forgot Hawaii. Right? There it is. Now, the problem, the worst problem with creationism right now is in Seattle. The people are headquartered in Seattle, Washington, and I wanted to show you where that is on the map. It's in the northwest United States, a very unlikely place for the headquarters of a creationist think tank, because Seattle is a very progressive, up-to-date place. But the headquarters of the National Intelligent Design Creationist Movement is in Seattle, Washington. And these are the people who are the leaders of the movement. They are part of, the name of the think tank is the Discovery Institute. Right there. This man is the president and founder of the Discovery Institute, which he founded in around 1991. In 1996, he teamed up with this man who is a philosopher of science, Stephen Meyer, and they established the creationist wing of the Discovery Institute, the Center for Science and Culture. Now, when it was first established, it was called the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture. But a few years ago, they changed the name because in the United States, the word renewal has very clear religious connotations. So it's now called the Center for Science and Culture in an attempt to present the appearance of being a secular scientific organization. These are the most important people, besides Chapman and Meyer. Michael Behe is a biochemist at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. He wrote a very popular book about intelligent design called Darwin's Black Box. Whoops. William Dembski has 6 degrees, none of them in science. He has a PhD in mathematics, 1 in philosophy, and a master's in divinity. And he wrote a book called Intelligent Design, The Bridge Between Science and Theology, for his lay audience, his audience of non-scientific supporters, ordinary people. And in this book, he explains intelligent design not only in overtly religious terms, but in overtly Christian terms. He connects intelligent design even to the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it's very clear that he understands intelligent design as a religious idea, but he's speaking to his friendly audience of supporters. When these people speak to the mainstream media, to the news media, and to the public, they present this as science. The next person, I'm going to skip over here to Philip Johnson. Philip Johnson is a retired law professor with no scientific credentials. He taught law at one of the most prestigious law schools in the country, the Bolt School of Law at the University of California in Berkeley. He has been the advisor to this group, and he was the one who pulled all these young guys together around him and created the movement. This guy here, Jonathan Wells, does have a degree in science, but he has 2 other degrees which he earned first. He has a PhD in theology or religious studies from Yale. He also has a degree in theology from the Unification Theological Seminary that is run by Reverend Moon. Do you know who he is? Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Wells is a Moonie. It's a cult, right? It's a very strange cult. Moon is from Korea. He's a very shady character, has lots of money, not quite sure where it comes from. He persuaded Wells to go back to school, to go to UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, and earn a PhD in biology, which he did. And he said he did that in order, his quote, to devote my life to destroying Darwinism. And so when he graduated in 2000, he has never done any scientific work after that. He is not a practicing scientist. He promotes intelligent design full-time. So these are the leaders of the intelligent design creationist movement. These are the most important ones in the United States. Oh, I forgot him. I had to add his picture later. John West is the associate director. He has a political science degree. Again, no training in science whatsoever. Michael Behe has no training in evolutionary biology. He's a biochemist. This is the book in which my co-author, Paul Gross, who is a scientist, wrote about the strategy that the Discovery Institute is executing in order to promote intelligent design. What they specifically want, the most important thing, is to have this taught in government schools as science. And they have spent quite a bit of time now. They really began their effort in 1992. And they have spent considerable money cultivating publicity for this idea, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what they've done. This is a paper that you can get for free. It came out in 2007, Understanding the Intelligent Design Creationist Movement, its true nature and goals. You can go to the centerforinquiry.net and you can download this. Do a little search. Just Google this paper and you can get it for free. So what is their strategy? Their strategy is called the wedge strategy. The metaphor comes from a wood-splitting wedge. I would dare say that none of you young men have ever used a wood-splitting wedge, right? You don't have to chop wood, right? Well, it's a wedge that you use to split a log, okay? And that's where the metaphor comes from. Philip Johnson, the older man, the advisor, he uses this metaphor. None of these people accept the fact that science is naturalistic. What that means is that scientists, out of procedural necessity, limit their explanations to natural ones. They seek natural explanations for natural phenomena. They have no way to test a supernatural explanation. The Discovery Institute, the intelligent design creationists, believe that any scientific explanation that omits God is insufficient, and so that it must incorporate God. And Philip Johnson says, he's speaking metaphorically, he wants to split open the log of naturalism to create an opening for the supernatural, for God. And in doing this, the people he really wants to influence are the public. He wants to wedge into the public mind the idea that science requires God to be fully explanatory. And he also wants politicians to accept this idea. So that's the wedge strategy. And he regards his work, which he's disabled from a stroke, but he started writing against Darwin in 1991, and he regards his work as the thin end of the wedge. He was creating, opening a way for the younger men to follow him. So just a little bit of basic information about intelligent design. There's Dr. Behe and Dr. Dembski, and each has made a signature contribution to the intelligent design science, right? Dr. Behe's signature contribution is the idea of irreducible complexity. That's a very old creationist idea. He updated the language a little bit. And what that means is this, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute. It means that there are certain structures, like the tail on a flagellum, the tail on a bacterium, the flagellum, that are irreducibly complex. What that means in his mind is that all of the parts he presents this like a little machine, like the motor on a boat, right? All of the parts had to be designed and put in place at one time. They could not have evolved in stepwise, piecemeal fashion over millions of years. So a designer was required to design all the parts, put them together at the same time, because if any of the parts is missing, the flagellum will not work. Dembski's chief contribution is specified complexity, and that's very simply an old creationist idea that the information in DNA likewise required an intelligent designer because it's too complex to have evolved by natural processes. And finally, they contend that the work of the designer is empirically detectable in biology. The only problem is they don't show how to detect it. But these are their chief ideas. Now, Dembski uses this, Behe uses this little picture that he took out of a biology book. It's a stylized representation of the bacterial flagellum to make it easy for students to understand it. It's presented as a little motor with all of the parts that you would have in a machine, an O-ring, an S-ring, a rotor. He even has a little movie that he uses, and he's talking about something like this. In fact, the E. coli bacterium is the classic example in the real world of what he's talking about. The little tails, it has 3, are irreducibly complex. All of its parts have to be present in order for it to function. And this is a beautiful little movie that illustrates exactly what he's talking about. Now, it was done by a legitimate scientific organization in Japan, the Protonic Nanomachine Project. But it's a beautiful illustration. I just thought it was very pretty, so I would show it to you. But it's a beautiful illustration of what he's talking about. That is a bacterial flagellum. Well, actually, there are 4 there. So let's look at this idea of irreducible complexity. He presents it metaphorically as like a mousetrap. This is how he explains it. He says that a mousetrap is irreducibly complex, and there's his definition of irreducible complexity. A single system, this is his scientific definition, okay? This is what he offers as his scientific definition. A single system, which is composed of several interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, and where the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively stop functioning. So he says if you take any piece off the mousetrap, it doesn't work anymore. My friend and colleague Kenneth Miller, who is a cell biologist at Brown University in Rhode Island, is Behe's chief critic. He wrote the first book in response to Behe. And he wanted to debunk the idea of irreducible complexity. So he started with the metaphor, and he gave his students the task of removing pieces from a mousetrap to see if they could find any functions for it. And these are all the functions that they found. Now, Ken's favorite function is the tie clip. He wears a mousetrap as a tie clip on his tie, right? So he debunked the metaphor completely, but he also debunked the scientific claims. This is a picture of, or a diagram, of the bacterial flagellum, which has about 50 parts. This is a picture of the type 3 secretory system, which is a subset of those parts. That is a little injector that an E. coli bacterium can use, or any bacterium can use, to inject toxins into a cell to make you sick. And so what this shows is that you can remove 40 of the 50 parts and still have a functioning structure. It doesn't function as for motility or movement. It functions to inject toxins into the cells of its host. So these are Ken's slides. He gave me this slide showing that if you take away 40 of the parts, it's not supposed to work according to Behe. Right? So you have 10 left. You only have 10, which should be non-functional, right? No, that's wrong. Because the bacterial flagellum has roughly 50 parts, and the type 3 secretory system has 10 of the exact same parts, and it functions perfectly well as an injector. And so Behe's definition is wrong. And that's been shown over and over and over again. Behe continues to use not only the scientific claim, but he continues to use the mousetrap metaphor as well. Now let's look at Dembski. Dembski claims that information in DNA is too complex to be the product of natural processes. These are diagrams that I found on creationist websites. I did not misspell the word complexity. Some creationists misspelled that word. But these are diagrams which will help me explain what he means. Dembski came up with what he calls the explanatory filter, right there. It's not a machine, it's a conceptual framework that he invented to get the result that he wanted. How does one detect intelligent design? How do you detect the work of the designer? Well, you eliminate everything that is the product of natural laws, which is highly predictable, right? You eliminate everything that is the product of chance, and anything that you cannot explain through either, natural law or chance must by default be designed. That is his scientific test for intelligent design. And so when you eliminate things that you can explain, what you can't explain must be the result of intelligent design. In other words, intelligent design wins by default, right? So he also uses the bacterial flagellum as a classic example of irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is a subset of specified complexity. So this is a diagram of the complexity of DNA, which he says is far too complex to be the product of natural processes. So he compares the E. coli bacterium to Mount Rushmore. Are you familiar with this thing in America? It was carved out by a sculptor on the side of a mountain. Here's his argument. When you look at Mount Rushmore, those are the American presidents, by the way, 4 of them. You probably recognize Washington and Lincoln at least. If you look at that structure, you know intuitively at a glance that it was intelligently designed, that it's not the product of chance. His argument is that when you look at the bacterial flagellum, you see exactly the same thing, that it is self-evidently the product of design, right? That it's a deep, self-evident intuition. And he considers that a knockdown, drag-out case for intelligent design. That's a very condensed version of his argument. These are the problem with his filter. Some of the smart young guys that have taken him on, one of whom is Gert Korthoff in the Netherlands, has a website where he's critiqued Dembski's work, has shown that with his own test, with the explanatory filter, you can get a false positive result. With things like this beautiful plant, the Saxifraga longifolia, which is a beautiful natural example of the Fibonacci sequence of numbers, which I'm sure you know. And this can be explained perfectly by natural processes, as can this vegetable down here. I don't know if you've seen one of these. A scientist at Fermilab, John Walker, found it in a Swiss supermarket. It's a relative of broccoli and cauliflower. He calls it fractal food. And these are perfectly explainable according to natural processes. But by Dembski's own test, these would have to be considered intelligently designed by a supernatural designer. And Dembski specified in 1992 that the designer must be a transcendent, supernatural designer. And you know who that is, right? That's God. Right? I just thought the big pictures were very pretty, so I'd show you the big versions. So this movement did eventually generate a lawsuit, a legal case, which was filed in December 2004. And the case was decided in favor of the plaintiffs. 11 parents from Dover, Pennsylvania, filed a lawsuit against their high school, their secondary school, because they did not want their children taught that intelligent design was a science. And the school board there, the directors of the school, decided that they would present intelligent design as science. So they filed a lawsuit, and this was the first legal case about intelligent design. We've had many earlier cases about creationism or creation science, but this was the first case involving intelligent design. And the name of the case is Kitzmiller for the lead plaintiff, Tammy Kitzmiller. She was a mother of a couple of students. Kitzmiller et al. Versus Dover Area School District, and it was decided in our favor in 2005. I was one of the witnesses for the parents. And so you can see this is very controversial. This gentleman here is Eric Rothschild, who was the attorney who prepared me for my testimony in the trial. If you are interested in learning the story of the trial, Public Broadcasting in the United States did a documentary a couple of years ago called Judgment Day, Intelligent Design on Trial. And you'll get the whole story of the trial. You can watch it on Google Video. Some of you students probably know Google Video. You can watch the entire 2 hours on Google Video. And it won the highest award given in the United States for documentary programs, the Peabody Award. So what is their strategy? A few of the specifics. In 1998, the Discovery Institute drew up this document right here. That's a picture of me at the trial. I had 2 jobs at the trial. I had to explain to the judge, there was no jury, just the judge. I had to explain to the judge that this document establishes intelligent design as a religious creationist movement. I also had to explain that this book, which was placed into Dover High School, into the library of Pandas and People, was written as a creationist textbook, and that's a completely different story. So I'm going to talk about this document. When the Discovery Institute founded the Center for the Renewal of Science and Culture, there's its old name, the picture on the website was Michelangelo's God creating Adam, which is overtly religious. They removed that picture some time ago, but I had to explain the strategy to the judge. This was a document in which the strategy over 20 years was explained to be given to potential financial donors. They were trying to raise money in 1998. We call it the wedge document, and the name of the document is actually the wedge. These are the 2 guys that leaked the document. The guy at the top, Matt Duss, stole it. He was a photocopy boy in the Discovery Institute's office in Seattle, and he was given this document to copy, and it was in a top secret folder. It had top secret written on it. And he thought that if it was so important, he should have a copy for himself. So he made a copy, and he gave it to this guy, who scanned it and put the language of the document on the internet. And when I started doing research about this document, he gave me, I was the first person to receive a copy of the electronic file. And this is the first page, that's the cover page. So what is this strategy about? It has 3 phases, or remember this was written it was actually probably written in 1996, but it was revised in 1998 to be used as a fundraising document. The intelligent design strategy was to be executed in 3 stages. First, scientific research, writing, and publicity. Phase 2, publicity and opinion making. Phase 3, cultural confrontation and renewal. Now, in that last phase, cultural confrontation and renewal is their true aim. They wanted to confront scientists who support evolution and show them to be wrong. And so the goal was to get them to come to conferences where they could be on the same program, right? And confront them about their materialism. You know, scientists study the material world, and they object to the fact that this necessarily leaves out the supernatural. The problem was that they were executing, and this is how how my book got started. I was looking at how much of the strategy they were executing, and I discovered that they were executing every phase of the strategy except that one. That's what they were not doing, okay? So a little bit more about the strategy. This is what I explained to the judge. This is another page in the document, and I'm going to select certain parts of it to show you. Under their 5-year goals, they have 5-year goals and 20-year goals. The 5-year goals were to be met by last year, 2008, right? But they see this as a very long-term strategy. So among their 5-year goals was the goal to see design begin to have influence outside science and to see debates in other issues that they consider related. They are social conservatives, and not only are they against against evolution, but they want to control public education. That means government schools. They want to control the policy governing government schools. Life issues. That means things like stem cell research, right, and cloning, both of which they are certainly against. Legal and personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is a conservative code phrase in the United States for discontinuing public assistance to the poor. Everybody's left to sink or swim. Social Darwinism. Right? These people don't like Darwin, but they love social Darwinism. Right? Among the 20-year goals, to see design theory begin to permeate other fields, other academic fields, psychology, even the humanities, even theology, even politics. And to see design theory permeate our religious, that means our America's religious, cultural, moral, and political life. That is every major institution in the United States, right? American culture, American politics, American religion. So their goals were very ambitious. How are they going to accomplish this? Well, this is one aspect of their plan to carry out the strategy. They were going to build alliances by recruiting future scientists. Now, you know who that is. That's the kids. You have to go after the kids, the future scientists. So they very aggressively court young people and try to recruit them. To make partnerships with think tanks, social advocacy groups, even churches and religious groups, right? So it's very clear that they seek their support from a religious base, right? And this makes it very clear how they understand their own program. This is the first page of text, which makes it extremely clear that this is a creationist document. In the first paragraph, they refer to God creating humans in His own image. And what do they want to do? They want to destroy materialistic science and replace it with a science that's consonant with their own theistic convictions. Now, in this document, the people that they name specifically as being responsible for the destruction of Western civilization are these guys right here. And this is actually a picture on one of their T-shirts. These two guys are dead, and Darwin isn't feeling very well. He's the next to go because they are telling young people and the public that evolution is a dying theory, that it will be relegated to the dustbin of intellectual history. And how one very, very explicitly religious feature of how they're going to execute their strategy is the fact that they're going to use apologetics seminars to advance intelligent design. Now, that is an American word that applies to evangelical religious people. Apologetics is a religious exercise in which they use logical argument to try to defend Christianity from what they perceive as an attack. It's a very explicitly religious exercise. And this was very important for me to tell the judge, among the other things that everything I told you, I told him and more, because it was my responsibility to show him, to establish to him that this was a religious program in the minds of its creators and in their own words. That's why they tried to get me kicked off the case, right? And that didn't work. I was the only witness that they tried to get kicked off the case. They tried their best. Among the other things I told the judge were that they themselves define intelligent design in religious terms. Dembski in 1999 defined it as the Logos theology of John's Gospel, restated in the idiom of information theory. Now, information theory is a very complicated scientific way of measuring the transmission of information using mathematics, right? It was developed by a man named Claude Shannon. And Dembski has co-opted Shannon's information theory and tried to recast intelligent design as a form of that. But notice he explicitly appeals to the book of John in the New Testament, the Logos, which is the Greek reference for Jesus Christ, the Logos theology. Why does he use the New Testament? Well, intelligent design maintains to the public and to the media that they are not based on the Bible, as is the old, that intelligent design is not based on the Bible, as is the old creation science, right? That is based in the book of Genesis. And the people who base creationism in the book of Genesis and who believe the earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old are the people with whom they disagree, because most of these intelligent design creationists, most of them, not all, are old earth creationists. They believe that the earth, they accept the science showing the earth to be 4.5 billion years old, but they need the political support of the young earth creationists who interpret the Bible literally. So in order to try to keep them in what they call their big tent, they have come up with this idea that, well, we'll simply make the foundation of intelligent design the book of John. And you probably know how it begins. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and by Him was made everything that was made. That's a very minimal statement that God created everything through Jesus Christ. And Johnson actually uses the term mere creation. That's how he calls this the defining concept of the movement. Mere creation. God merely created. How long it took him to do it is unimportant. The fact is he created it, and all of the creationists can agree on that. We can all work together politically, right? So, but you can see that the definitions are overtly religious. This is by far, though, the most important quote. It's from Paul Nelson, who is a young earth creationist. He's a founding member of this group. He's been with them since the very earliest days. The reason he's with them is because he is supposed to be the liaison to the young earth creationist community in the United States. His job was to convince them to join with the intelligent design movement and to support it, because they know that they can't go around telling people that the earth is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old. They can't say that in court. And so he was interviewed by this magazine. It's a magazine, a Christian magazine called Touchstone. In 1999, they did a special issue about intelligent design, and in 2004, they did a 5-year anniversary issue. And they interviewed all of the leaders of the intelligent design movement. This is in 2004. This is 12 years after they started advancing the idea of intelligent design and promoting it as a new scientific theory, right? And Paul Nelson was asked what was the biggest challenge for the intelligent design movement in 2004. And his answer was very, very blunt, very candid. But keep in mind, his audience was their Christian supporters, so he could speak more candidly to them than they speak to the media and to the public. His answer is the biggest challenge is to come up with a theory of biological design, which we don't have. We have, if you don't have a theory, it's very hard to plan your research program. So what do they have? They have a bag of intuitions, powerful intuitions, and a handful of notions such as irreducible complexity and specified complexity, but no general theory of biological design. Now, this is a very candid statement. For once, he was telling the truth, right? But it's a remarkable statement because they've been promoting intelligent design as a fully fledged scientific theory. But when in English, when you call something a notion or an intuition, that severely degrades its status, right? It's meant to be very trivial. And so he was being very honest. He's saying that we really don't have anything. So that's our challenge. So for court, I made a chart showing the judge that intelligent design comes directly out of creation science. What did they do? They discarded the idea of the young earth. They discarded the idea of Noah's flood, which they call flood geology, that the flood in the Bible, Noah's flood, carved out the surface features of the earth, all right, and carved out the Grand Canyon. You've all seen pictures of the Grand Canyon. It's very grand, and the idea is that water did all that, the flood, right? Noah's flood did that. And so I have a chart in which I trace the ancestry through quotations. And this is one that we used in court to show the judge that intelligent design is simply rehashed creationism. In 1973, Henry Morris, who is the founder of the creation science movement in the United States, made the statement that evolution is not a fact. It's neither a fact nor a theory nor a hypothesis. It's a belief. It has the same status as any other belief. It's like a religious belief. You have to make a commitment to it and believe it by faith. Exactly 20 years later, we have Stephen Meyer, who was founded the Center for the Science and Culture with Bruce Chapman. He's the director of the Center for Science and Culture, saying exactly the same thing with one of his colleagues, that only in a trivial sense can evolution be considered a fact. And when I was doing further research after the trial was over, I discovered, that it has roots. We keep finding evidence of its creationist history. This man, Ariel Roth, is a young earth creationist who testified in a trial in Arkansas in 1981. And he was testifying about complex integrated structures, applying it to, for example, the respiratory system. The idea being that in an organ system, if you remove any of the parts, the system ceases to function. This is simply the earlier version of irreducible complexity applied to an organ system. What Behe has done is drop this concept down to the subcellular level, right? And target molecular biology, which is not his field, but it's one of the newer areas of science in which there are still things that are not fully understood. And creationists always target the newer areas of science. and take advantage of the gaps in the explanation to say that this cannot be explained. It's unexplainable by science, so it must be explained by an intelligent designer. And there's Beatty saying exactly the same thing in his definition of irreducible complexity. Dembski's contribution of specified complexity. This is a very well-known creationist, Norm Geisler, who in a chapter in a book about miracles uses exactly the same term, complex specified information. That was in 1982, and Dembski is still using that term as though he invented it, right? But it's an old creationist term. So that was some of the evidence that was presented in court. I had 5 other expert witnesses, and we won the case. Those people that you see are mostly the parents. This is the lead plaintiff. This is Tammy Kitzmiller, who filed the initial complaint against what the school was doing. These are some of the parents. This is a lawyer. This is a parent. This is Eugenie Scott, who's the director of the National Center for Science Education, which played a major role in assisting the attorneys. So we won the case on December 20th, 2005, when the judge declared, Judge Jones, that intelligent design is not science. He ruled that it violates, teaching intelligent design as science in a government school violates the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits the establishment of religion or the sponsorship of religion by the government. And it also violated the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now, one would hope that such a firm decision, which is on the internet, you can look up his decision, type in Judge John Jones Kitzmiller opinion, and it'll be your first hit on Google. It's 139 pages. It's very readable. One judge in the United States referred to it as judicial poetry, and it's already become a very famous decision, although it only applies technically in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, only in the area where he has jurisdiction. But it did not end the efforts of the Discovery Institute. So this issue is not over by any means. They understand that this decision applies only to the Middle District of Pennsylvania. And so they realize that they have a lot of other, the entire rest of the United States to advance their strategy. So what did they proceed to do? Well, Dembski has done what he presents as scientific work in evolutionary informatics. Right? There's Dembski. He's listed on this special website that he set up with his research partner, Robert J. Marks, who is on the faculty at Baylor University. Now, Baylor is a Baptist university in Texas, but it's a very fine school. They teach evolution. This guy, Marks, is an engineer. He was hired when Dembski was at Baylor. He had money under a grant for 5 years to set up a think tank, and the president of the university at the time invited him to set up the think tank at Baylor. And he made himself very unwelcome, behaved very badly, and when his contract ended in 2004, was not invited back. But before he left, Baylor hired several of his friends, and Robert Marks is one of his friends. And they put this website up to cast themselves as doing very serious scientific work in evolutionary informatics. It just turns out that they do a few other things as well. Robert Marks, in his spare time, does these nasty cartoons. And that's the second one. Let's see. Back it up. Hang on. 2. That's one example of what Mr. Marks does with his time. Dr. Marks, engineering professor Marks. Right? And they also have a web designer and programmer named Mr. Montagnez, who also serves them in another capacity. He is an intelligent design rapper. Okay, there you go. Now, Even despite that, Dr. Behe continues to promote irreducible complexity. He continues to present it as you can take a very quick look at his language. He presents it as a scientific idea, which is not religious, right, and which is supported by sound science. He's written another book after the Dover trial. The Dover trial was in 2005. We got our verdict, and he wrote this book. It was published in 2007, which is just more of the same, except he applies it to different things like malaria and things like that. His own department at Lehigh University has posted a disclaimer of his work. They do not want to be associated with what he's doing. They, of course, affirm his right and freedom to do it, but they are very embarrassed by his work. Now, he has tenure. They cannot fire him. But he doesn't do any serious scientific work any longer. After he got tenure, he began promoting intelligent design exclusively. And so the strategy continues. They are now using code language because after the Dover trial, they cannot speak in terms of intelligent design. They cannot use that word because they know that it's a surefire legal target. So they are now using code language. And if you see these terms in the United States or anywhere else, because these guys hope to spread this they have some supporters in Europe, and I'm going to tell you who they are. This is very suspicious language. When you see these terms, you know that you're looking at intelligent design. The first one is teach the controversy. That's a little soundbite that they use to convey the idea that evolution, that there's a raging controversy inside the scientific community about the status of intelligent design, which is false. The status of evolution, which is false. Another one, they claim to be doing this in the name of academic freedom. This is an old creationist code phrase. Academic freedom means that teachers have the right to teach creationism and students have the right to be told about it. Critical analysis, critical thinking, that's become a very important educational goal in the United States, is to teach children to think critically. And what the intelligent design people did was to co-opt the language of that teaching benchmark and to use it on their own behalf. So critical thinking has become a code phrase for intelligent design. The strengths and weaknesses of evolution. Now that's been one they've used in the state of Texas. That was in the Texas science teaching standards for the entire state. It was put there 10 years ago by creationists, and just this year there's been a really big fight over whether to leave that language in or take it out. What the State Board of Education did in Texas was to take that out, but to replace it with additional code language, and I'll show you what that is a little bit later. And then arguments for and against evolution or arguments for and against neo-Darwinism. There are no arguments against evolution that are scientifically sound. There is no evidence against evolution. But they appeal to the innate sense of the American people to be fair and to give everybody an equal say and play on that as though there were scientific evidence and arguments against evolution. They've come out with a new textbook, which is, you remember the pandas book that I showed you the picture of the pandas book? That book was explicitly written in creationist language, and they changed the language in that book after a United States Supreme Court decision. They replaced the language, the word creationism, with the term intelligent design. Well, in this book that came out after the Kitzmiller decision, the one I was in, they took the word intelligent design out. But it's it has all of the earmarks of a creationist book. It has sanitized terminology. It attempts to undermine evolution. For example, it attacks the idea of universal common descent. And it does explicitly include irreducible complexity, which is overtly a creationist idea. It was written by the creationists at the Discovery Institute, and it has one of the code phrases in the subtitle, Arguments for and Against Neo-Darwinism. But they produced a very slick video for the website to promote the book, which could easily fool a naive teacher, a poorly prepared teacher, or a young teacher who doesn't understand evolution all that well into thinking that this is a good supplemental textbook to use in class.
Many scientists disagree about key parts of modern evolutionary theory, such as the ability of natural selection and range mutation to account for the complexity of living systems. What should the public do when experts disagree about whether the evidence supports a theory, as they do in the case of Darwinian evolution? The answer: teach both the arguments for and against. Finally, there's a textbook that teaches both the evidence for and against Darwinian evolution. Explore Evolution, the case for and against Neo-Darwinism from Hill House Publishers. Explore Evolution presents both the strengths and weaknesses of such topics as universal common descent, the creative power of natural selection, and molecular machines. Explore Evolution can help all teachers enrich their coverage of evolution and develop the critical thinking skills of their students. This is the responsible way to teach evolution that advances science education, fosters civil discourse, and respects public opinion. Explore Evolution helps teachers to present the case for Darwin's theory of evolution as Darwin himself did, as a credible but contestable argument. For more information, go to www.exploreevolution.com.
They have made very good use of the internet to promote intelligent design. This is a very nice little video. And you can see how it's presented to make evolution appear to make evolution appear very weak, that you can attack it by teaching the weaknesses of it. So, the most recent development is that the Discovery Institute has on another of its websites a model academic freedom law, a model piece of legislation that they have been promoting in various states for adoption as law. Last year, they coordinated the introduction of such bills in 6 American states, one of which was my own state of Louisiana, and Louisiana was the only one of those 6 states to pass the bill. What does the bill say? And our governor signed it. You'll probably hear more about Bobby Jindal. He's the governor of Louisiana who is running for president of the United States. He fancies himself the Republican version of Obama. And he is presently raising money around the country for his presidential aspirations. He signed this legislation. What does the law permit? The law permits science teachers in government schools to use creationist supplemental material in addition to the state-approved textbook, which means that they can add creationist materials to their approved teaching materials. And we already knew that Bobby Jindal is a creationist because when he ran for governor unsuccessfully in 2003, he said that teachers should have a right to teach a range of views. That's a Discovery Institute code phrase meaning a range of scientific views which includes intelligent design. He reiterated his support for teaching creationism when he was asked about it when he ran for governor in 2007. He was asked about it on television, and he again reaffirmed his support for teaching intelligent design. So despite the fact that there's the bill, the Senate Bill 733, and those are all of the legislatures that signed on as sponsors of the bill. We had a number of scientists, very good scientists from Louisiana. We had public high school secondary teachers testify at the legislature. I testified. We all asked the legislature to kill this bill. Then we lobbied Governor Jindal. We had no fewer than 9 national American scientific organizations ask him, write letters and ask him to veto the bill. And he refused to do it. We got one of his teachers from Brown University. Brown is an Ivy League school, one of the oldest universities in the United States, very prestigious. Governor Jindal has an undergraduate biology degree from Brown. And we found one of his old teachers, and the teacher made a very public appeal for him to veto the bill. And he still refused. So we could not get him to veto the bill. He signed the bill on my birthday last year. Now, what has happened since is the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology, which is a major science organization of 2,300 members in the United States, wrote the governor a letter on February the 5th telling him that because he signed the bill, they are not going to hold any future meetings in Louisiana. They are going to boycott the state. You know the word boycott? It means to refuse to do business with someone. They're going to boycott Louisiana as long as this law is in effect. Everybody loves New Orleans, and they had their 2004 convention in New Orleans, and I spoke at that meeting. It was a very large meeting, and this was a very difficult decision for them to make, but this is the first First time that any organization, any group at all, has taken a concrete action in response to creationist legislation. This is the very first time. And so it was very difficult for them to do because everybody has a soft spot for New Orleans, but they felt that it was important to take a stand, and other states are probably going to pay a lot of attention to this. So they wrote to the governor. The governor ignored the letter, didn't respond. This was big news when it hit the newspapers. The New York Times wrote about it. Big news. And where are they holding their meetings? In Utah, a state which is largely Mormon, right? Why are they holding it in Utah? Because in 2005, when a Utah legislator tried to introduce a piece of creationist legislation, he failed. And the State Board of Education issued a very strong statement. This is only a tiny little piece of it. It's several pages long. Issued a statement saying that evolution is central to their curriculum. And so SICB is holding their meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah. So, this year already, bills have been introduced in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Iowa, Alabama, and since I made the slide, Florida. The Oklahoma bill is dead. It died in committee. It never got out of committee. The scientists in Iowa have issued a statement signed by 200 science faculty in the universities opposing the legislation. And in Texas, this month, March, the state board is about to make its final vote on the language of the science standards. And this is the new code phrase that they put in: analyze and evaluate. But they only use this language with respect to various aspects of teaching evolution and some earth science. Now, they do have some European connections. One is a guy in Italy named Giuseppe Sermonti, who is connected with this journal, and I cannot pronounce that in Italian properly, so I'm not going to try. But Jonathan Wells has published an article in that journal. From what I understand, that journal publishes some legitimate stuff and some really weird stuff, right? And this is an article that Jonathan Wells claims gives an intelligent design strategy for doing cancer research. And of course, it does no such thing. They have a German supporter who used to be a fellow at the Discovery Institute, Siegfried Scherer, who teaches at the Technical University of Munich. He and a colleague, Reinhard Juncker, wrote this creationist book. Scherer is a young earth creationist who believes, this is not his drawing, this came from Answers in Genesis, which I found it on their website. That's a young earth creationist organization. They're the ones that have the Creation Museum. You've heard of that? Okay, that's came from their website. Siegfried Scherer believes, as they do, that the coal deposits on Earth were formed by floating forests that were floating around during Noah's flood. And that's the source of the coal deposits on planet Earth. And here's a picture that really, there you go, you see that it's floating? And this is a drawing. There you go, there are the roots of the trees and the plants floating around in the water, and there's the fish. This is what this man believes, and he's one of their associates in Germany. Philip Johnson did a tour of 8 cities in the United Kingdom with young earth creationist Andrew Snelling. There they are together. Their tour was called Darwin Reconsidered. There is Johnson with some of his admirers in the UK. And there's a website, Darwin Reconsidered, and you could read Philip Johnson's report of that event. They have a Turkish supporter that they trot out, who is a Muslim, when they want to provide the appearance of religious diversity. This is a young journalist in Istanbul named Mustafa Akyol, who supports the Discovery Institute and comes over to the United States periodically to do events with them. But he has connections to this man, Harun Yahya, which is a false name for a Turkish man, a creationist named Adnan Oktar, who a couple of years ago flooded Europe, specifically France, in July 2007, flooded France with thousands of copies of this huge book. This book weighs 12 pounds. Thousands of copies were flooded into France, and then last year they began showing up in American universities. Faculty began receiving these unsolicited, and nobody knows why. or who paid for them. But this is the connection. Mustafa Akyol is connected with this man's Turkish creationist organization. And this is an illustration of the book. The book is beautifully done. It's just the words are creationist. Right? The pictures are great. Right? So, if you're wondering why I do all this, I do it because I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, right? I'm a good citizen, and I want to make sure that children learn proper science. It was very important to me because my son has a biology degree, he's a physician, and I know how important it is that children learn science properly. These pictures are from schools in my area. In fact, this school right here was my own secondary school. My children went to this school, and these are some of the young people who presently go to the school. And the idea is that I do this because learning science properly, getting a good education is essential to America's future, as it is to the future of Belgian children. Aren't they adorable? Aren't they cute? Google Images helps you find a lot of stuff, right? So this is Belgium's future as well. And I understand that there is a fledgling or a burgeoning creationist effort in Belgium. So there is some concern, and I hope that you have learned enough about intelligent design not to take it seriously. And so I will end by thanking you for inviting me to your beautiful country. Thank you very much.
Thank you.